Intelligence, courage, and financial savvy. All things needed to run a successful steamship line. While we remember the White Star Line for big, beautiful luxury hotels at sea like RMS Olympic and RMS Titanic, it wasn't always such a successful household name. In reality, the White Star Line started out a failure, a disastrous experiment that almost ended in a whimper. Welcome to Fast Facts Friday. My name is Eleanor. Just a quick disclaimer for a younger audience before we dive in. This story may be disturbing to some, so viewer discretion is advised. Okay everyone, let's get into it. We've covered the White Star Line's history after Thomas Ismay purchased the company. However, we've not looked at the original company and its checkered past. Before Thomas Ismay, White Star Line was not the superpower we know it to be. It fell far behind Cunard Line and struggled, almost becoming extinct. This first iteration was founded in Liverpool, England by John Pilkington and Henry Wilson in 1845. Before the heavy focus on the transatlantic passenger trade, their eyes looked to the UK to Australia trade, which vastly increased upon the discovery of gold in Australia in 1851. This was the beginning of the Australia gold rushes, which significantly increased the numbers of workers moving from elsewhere to Australia where gold was discovered. Many wished to immigrate to Australia, and the population of Australia ballooned from 430,000 to 1.7 million people in just 3 short years. Well, White Star Line saw a money-making opportunity they couldn't pass up, beginning to charter ships for their fleet. For those unaware and our younger audience members, ship chartering is the process of hiring a ship from a vessel owner to transport goods or people. This owner could be a private owner or another shipping line. The charterer enters into a contract with the ship owner to use the ship for a specific voyage or time period. The charter party is a legal binding agreement that outlines the terms and conditions of the charter, including rights and responsibilities of both parties. It's still a common practice to this day, and the simplest thing to compare it to is leasing a car. Alright, let's continue with White Star Line and their Australian ship trade. Pilkington and Wilson emphasized the safety of their ships when addressing the press, as of course, this would be a main concern. Crossing any ocean is still unpredictable and dangerous. However, back in the 1850s, it was even more so, with accidents happening all the time. Between Australia and the tip of South Africa is particularly unpredictable, with multiple ships sinking or simply disappearing in this area, like the infamous SS Waratah. In order to make their voyages more pleasant aboard such austere wooden sailing ships, White Star Line hired groups of musicians to allow passengers to dance to popular tunes and relax. This was one of the earliest forms of entertainment aboard ships, and music and entertainment is still a key part of the passenger trade today, only now there are more options like musical theater, live bands, movies, and much more. For the passenger trade between the UK and Australia, speed and size of the vessels traveling became a key factor to success. If more people could be transported on one ship and more frequent voyages could be made, more money could be made. Initially, the fleet had the chartered sailing ships RMS Taylor, Blue Jacket, White Star, Red Jacket, Ellen, Ben Nevis, Emma, Mermaid, and Iowa. Taylor, the subject of this Sunday's episode, was the largest ship of its day, and high expectations were placed upon her shoulders, a beacon of hope for White Star Line's success. However, as we will learn this Sunday, these hopes were quickly dashed. She left on her maiden voyage on January 19, 1854, and she proved difficult to handle for a multitude of reasons. Her crew was also inexperienced, which compounded the issues, and she'd run aground in high seas at Lambay Island near Ireland. The ship then sank, with only 290 of the 650 people aboard surviving. We'll get into further details of this on Sunday, but for now, it's important to note that the inquiry following the incident placed the blame on the ship's owners, Charles Moore and Company, and not White Star Line, citing a lack of necessary safety precautions when the ship was put into service. White Star Line and the ship's captain escaped without blame. And you can't blame us for wanting to dig into this story. If you are enjoying this episode and want to hear more about ships, their careers, and their wrecks, check out our main show, Shipwreck Sunday, every Sunday night at 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Alright, it's time to look further into the early parts of White Star Line's history. After the disastrous loss of Taylor, White Star Line ordered several clippers of their own, the first being Red Jacket. This ship was efficient and ensured success for the company on the Australian route, thus leading to newer, faster ships in their fleet like Shalimar, Sultana, Emma, and the White Star. Steamships were still in their infancy, and the majority of passengers placed their trust in sailing vessels, so most ships during this time were still sailing ships. Even after steamships started becoming more normalized, many still had backup sails to reassure passengers. Think of the earliest of Thomas Ismay's White Star Line ships, like Oceanic, Atlantic, Baltic, and Republic of the 1870s. Though the Klondike Gold Rush wouldn't officially begin until 1896, the rumblings of gold in northwestern Canada were already spreading through Europe, and so White Star Line began to run voyages from Liverpool to Victoria, British Columbia, and they promoted this in several Welsh newspapers, advertising it as the gateway to the Klondike Gold Rush. One of the ships promoted in this advertising was Silistria, and she traveled around Cape Horn, South America, stopping in Valparaiso, Chile, and San Francisco, California, arriving in Victoria after 4 arduous months at sea. I can only imagine what being at sea for 4 months back then would be like. I'd be excited for about the first few weeks, then it would become grueling. In 1856, unfortunately for White Star Line, they lost their illustrious postal contracts. Companies wanted these to make bank, and losing this took a huge gash out of their revenue. Despite this and the increasing need for financial responsibility, Wilson persisted in wanting larger ships to keep the public's eye on them. Pilkington, rather dubious, just cut his losses and left the company. Wilson just replaced him with his brother-in-law, James Chambers, a yes-man who went along with Wilson's fiscally wild strategy, or lack thereof. They continued putting all their eggs in one basket, and that basket was bigger sailing ships. Meanwhile, their most direct rivals, the Black Ball Line and the Eagle Line, merged in 1858 after financial difficulties from establishing steamship services. Wilson did at least one thing right, paying attention to migration flows over the next few years, directing his services to Canada or New Zealand according to trends. In 1863, the company had their first steamship built for them, SS Royal Standard. She was a single-screw steamship, and she unfortunately wrecked in 1869 as part of a different company, C.M. Palmer of Newcastle, and this was due to the collapse of the first White Star Line, which we will cover now. The original White Star Line merged with 2 other small lines in 1864, the Black Ball Line and the Eagle Line, to form a conglomerate called the Liverpool, Melbourne and Oriental Steam Navigation Company Limited. Meanwhile, with Wilson at the helm, the company was borrowing large sums of money to finance new ships, including the second steamer Sirius. Worried about the possibility of financial ruin, Chambers left the company, and Wilson replaced him with John Cunningham. However, business continued to decline. Sirius had to be sold before she even entered service. The merger was not prosperous, and White Star Line broke away to focus on Liverpool to New York City services. White Star Line continued heavy investments with little return, borrowing more and more money from the company's bank until it, the Royal Bank of Liverpool, failed in October of 1867. The failure of this financial institution left White Star Line with a whopping £527,000 of debt, which in 2024 would equate to £73,943,645. Being buried in utter failure and debt, White Star Line was forced into bankruptcy. That isn't the end of their story, however, and Thomas Ismay, a director of the National Line, purchased the White Star Line for £1,000 in 1868, equivalent to £141,714 in 2024. He'd go on to revolutionize the company, turning it into the powerhouse at sea that we remember it as today. Ships like SS Atlantic, RMS Teutonic, and the infamous Titanic would be built under his and his son J. Bruce Ismay's leadership, forming a powerful steamship company and one of the most recognizable by name to this day. If you liked that story and wanted to hear something similar, check out our History of the White Star Line video in the cards. Stay tuned this Sunday for the story of the clipper RMS Taylor, which ran aground off Lambay Island and sank in 1854. Thank you for tuning into Fast Facts Friday. Have a lovely weekend, and we'll see you next time.